everyone. I'm Melody Rose, Board Chair of the NACD Minnesota Chapter. Thank you for joining us for this virtual program on the 2024 NACD Blue Ribbon Commission Report, Technology in the Boardroom, Driving Trust and Value. This is a fairly unique program today. We are doing a joint program between NACD Minnesota and New England chapters, and we are also welcoming the NACD Colorado chapter, who is joining us virtually. So welcome to everyone who is joining us, including those from the West Coast. Before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping items. First, a reminder to please remain muted throughout the program and to use the chat function to pose questions. There's no need to wait until the Q&A portion of the event to submit questions. We will leave time at the end of the program for your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Next, we know that many of you want to receive credits for this program. To receive credit, we need to know your first and last name. Please make sure that your full name is visible on your Zoom window. For Minnesota and North Dakota guests who want CLE credit, please put your first and last name and state in the chat, and we'll track all of that. Finally, the panelists and moderators' statements and opinions are their own, and they are not the statements or opinions of the companies with which they work. Now, I would be remiss if I did not thank all of our chapter sponsors. The continued loyalty of these organizations underscores the important role of NACD. It is their support that allows us to fulfill our mission of delivering world-class, director-centric local programming and peer-to-peer sharing of insights that is vital to advancing excellence in the boardroom. Today, we are highlighting two of our sponsors, PwC and Frederickson, who have continued to support our mission of excellent corporate governance. As president of Frederickson, it is a particular personal honor to partner with the local Minnesota chapter and the New England and Colorado chapters as well. And a special thank you to PwC and all of the sponsors for your support. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Diane Hessen. Diane is the founder and chairman of C-Space. She serves on the boards of Panera Breads, Eastern Bank, Bright Cove, Sago, Tufts University, NACD New England, and is vice chair of the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center Trustee Advisory Board. Diane, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Melody. Good afternoon, everyone. We are really happy to have everyone here. I was trying to come up with something clever, like from the land of 10,000 lakes and the land of 10,000 lobsters and the land of 10,000 hiking trails, right? Thank you for coming. And hopefully you're going to get a lot out of this session. Let me jump right in. If you've been a member of NACD for a while, you know that every year the organization identifies one meaty and challenging issue that is especially important to board excellence today. And then they invite about 25 members with expertise in that area to do a collective deep dive on the issue and to develop recommendations. That group is called a Blue Ribbon Commission. For 2024, the issue selected was technology leadership in the boardroom, acknowledging the blistering pace of technology-driven changes that are right now rewriting the rules of business. So today we are joined by three expert panelists, each of whom served on the Blue Ribbon Commission, and they're going to unpack not just what is in this report, but also what it actually means for us in our boardrooms. We're going to do this in two parts. First, I'll be asking questions of the panelists, and then we will open it up to all of you. So as usual, feel free to put your questions in the chat. whenever they arise. And I will also try to incorporate them even in the first part. You have detailed bios of everyone in your materials, but so let me just do some 30-second intros of the three people here. Tarun Khanna is the Jorge Paulo Leman Professor at Harvard, where he teaches both at Harvard Business School and at Harvard College. His online course, Entrepreneurship in Emerging Economies, has been taken by nearly 1 million students in about 200 countries. He serves on a number of publicly traded and private boards in the US and in Asia, and is a co-founder of several tech ventures. Next is Ryan McManus. Ryan is the founder of Tectonic IO, where he advises Fortune 500 companies, governments, startups, and private equity investors on AI and other emerging technologies. He's written numerous articles on AI, digital transformation, and more, and he serves on many boards, including Nortech Systems Empower, Limbic AI, and NACD New York. And then we have Laurie Yoler, who has served on over 25 boards across public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Laurie was a founding board member of Tesla, which is a conversation for another time. And she currently serves on the board of directors of Church and Dwight, NACD Northern California, and she's on several tech advisory boards. She's also a venture partner at Playground Global, which is a deep tech venture capital firm. And as you can see, I want to be more like Laurie after serving with her in this commission. So I'm wearing red glasses like hers. And of course, we were all on this Blue Ribbon Commission together. You've got three really, really brilliant people to hear from today. So Laurie, let me start with you. Before we get into the actual report, people ask me this a lot. Tell us a little bit about what it's like to be on a Blue Ribbon Commission, kind of how the process worked and what some of the tensions or debates were that shaped the final product. So inside scoop.
So I actually have been on the Blue Ribbon Commission the last 2 years, and the experiences were wildly different. First, if you are asked to be on a Blue Ribbon Commission, say yes, because you get to meet and talk to incredible folks like Ryan and Tarun, who I may not have met otherwise, who bring very different perspectives. And the conversations were so engaging. But I will tell you, and this year we had Nora Denzel and David Kenny as the co-chairs, who were both fabulous at leading the process. The reason I talk about the 2 years is 2 years ago, the discussion was about culture. And we all shared stories on culture and made some recommendations, and everything went along very smoothly, actually. And there was a lot of agreement. This year, it was a whole different ballgame, and I happened to be at the NACD masterclass with Nora Denzel and Ryan the last 2 days. And Nora reminded me that I derailed the entire conversation on the first meeting of the second Blue Ribbon Commission on Technology, because the subject was technology. And I just looked up the definition of technology is the application of scientific knowledge for practical purposes, especially in industry. Machinery and equipment developed from the application of scientific knowledge. Okay, so I notice on this webinar, we have people from insurance, we have people from chemical industries, industrial, financial. So what you define technology as is going to differ dramatically based on your industry. And one of my boards is in consumer products, but mostly chemistry based. And so how they define technology is new formulations of chemistry, not software, and not perhaps robotics or something like that. So in this report, during the first session, I said, okay, how are we defining technology? Which technologies are in and which are out? And if someone is upgrading their SAP ERP system, is that technology? Is that in? Should this be included in the report? And if you have the report, one of the wonderful things is they pulled in on page 25, the White House identified the most promising technologies to watch which include advanced engineering, quantum computing, space technology, semiconductors, energy, AI, sensing, advanced computing, robotics. Okay, so which one of those is in and which is out? And are they all governed the same way? And so we had some very meaty discussions and lots of side discussions in between, because how are we going to help with a report on technology leadership if we don't know what technology we're talking about and what's in and what's out? So this one took a lot of thought and effort, and I just wanted to say I think the end product was exceptional. I think the one before I thought was fabulous as well, but I know how many hours this one took in comparison and how much more difficult it was to really think through all of those different potential combinations. And so I think that the NACD team did a phenomenal job on this report, and I have many copies and I refer to them constantly, because also having service providers and experts who can provide all these toolkits in the back are real takeaways that you can take for your boards.
That's great. Great. Thank you. I do remember that moment, Lori, and then somebody else jumped on it and we got into a side conversation about quantum computing. So great. Having said that, technology's been around for a long time. So let me just move over to you, Ryan. Why this topic and why now, given that tech is not a new thing? What made this the right time to focus on the board's role in technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks very much again for having me. One of the first quotes that's in the commission report is one of our director colleagues on the in the commissioners said there is something unique about this moment, and so we looked to explore that, and we came up with really 6 drivers of the particular moment. Number one, and Lori, listed out a number of the technologies, but there is a confluence of technological advancements really across all industries across the stack that is raising, as we say, raising the stakes. So we're all very familiar, of course, that AI is a big driver. AI is not the only game in town. It's probably influencing and driving every other technological sort of trend that's happening at the moment. But there's so much happening that there is just an innate complexity to understanding all of those different moving pieces. The second corollary to that is that because of all that technological change, first of all, we know that technology is one of the most, if not the most important driver, not only of automation and cost efficiency, but also of value creation and business model evolution, which is really where the winners and the losers start to distinguish themselves. The problem is, for many organizations, the timing there is getting compressed. So we're seeing things that used to take multiple years happening in a matter of months or a very, very sort of tighter time frame. And that speed element is something that many organizations, many boards have never really needed to instrument directly into their operations and into their planning and investment cycles. Point number 3, again, as a result of the previous 2, of course, is that the competitive dynamics are shifting. It's not only the incumbents that we need to compare ourselves to. There's always next generations of competition that's coming in either from other established leading companies, large companies, and of course the startup sector that it tends to nip around at the heels at the beginning before they start to expand very, very quickly when you have a winning formula there. So that competitive dynamic continues to get more and more complex. Point number 4, again, a function of speed, is that innovations are outpacing board member experience in many cases. One way to think about all of this that's happening right now is that we talked about this, Lori mentioned the masterclass that we've been at this week. One of the things that we discussed yesterday was it's entirely possible that the last 60 years of compute is being rewritten and is evolving. And that's the entire stack. It's not only the chips, it's not only the algorithms, it's not only the kinds of things that we would see as an end user. It goes all the way down to things like photonic cabling, because we have to be able to push 100x more compute through all of these systems, right? Power sources, all of those kinds of dynamics. So there's a massive, right, $22 trillion forecast in terms of just the AI economy by 2030. That is a massive game. It's about 4% of global GDP. So we have to be clear both about the scale, but also about the volume of innovation that's going to be coming through all of the investment that's going in here. We have to have a very active radar that's happening across a lot of different domains. As a result of this, we've also seen a lot more focus than arguably in previous technology cycles about responsible use, ethical use, and that's a very pronounced conversation in the boardroom with different stakeholder groups, and it's something that no board can afford to ignore. And then the sixth point, again, a complement to the fifth, is that the regulatory environment is pretty much a patchwork, right? So just in the United States, there's federal trends, there's state laws on the books, there's local laws that are on the books, there's hundreds and hundreds of laws that have either been passed or are in process, and that's just in one country. The European Union Act that came into effect in the last several months and is going to continue to roll out over the forthcoming years. It's a global sort of smorgasbord of lots of different kinds of things. And there's, again, an innate complexity to just tracking the regulatory requirements in addition to all of the competitive and technological change. So as directors, we really have our plates full.
Wow, that's for sure. And we're going to come back to some of these issues later on in the conversation, like this whole issue of, how do we run fast enough when what we need to know is just really accelerating. But I want to, Tarun, everybody always says we want to avoid becoming the next Blockbuster or Kodak, but let's talk about one of the report's key messages, that boards need to treat technology as a core part of strategy, not a staff thing or not a side conversation. So in your experience, what does that actually look like in a boardroom?
Thank you, Diane, and thank you everybody for including me in the commission and in this session. If I could just add something to what Ryan just said for
Yeah.
a second, the why now period of this. I guess I have a different vantage point as an academic and an entrepreneur and a board member, that the disjuncture between what I'm seeing in the science labs, and I'm surrounded by scientists in Cambridge, at least in the Harvard MIT ecosystem, the disjuncture between the speed at which science is getting done, and that itself is being fueled, as Ryan was suggesting, with AI and so on, but not just AI. And if I may say, without being impolite to all of us, the glacial speed or lack of speed with which boards are able to absorb this, and that's a self-critique as much as it is a criticism for all of us. That disjuncture is so striking now, and I think that's the answer to why now, or part of the answer to why now. And I think it's both a threat and a huge opportunity. One of the things that I think the report, Diane, getting to the nub of your question, I feel that most boards, whether they are large public boards or even nonprofit boards that I've been on, are mostly playing defense. And we need to have a component of playing offense. And that to me is sort of a striking, if we think back to many of the discussions we had in the Blue Ribbon Commission, that seemed to me to be a subtext of at least a portion of the commissioners, is to encourage people to say, of course, compliance and risk are table stakes. They're par for the course. They're things that we've been doing for a long time, but don't conflate technology with either just digitization or just playing defense. It's risky not to take judicious risks in some way, and I think that to me is the central message of the report. What I really liked about the report was, and thank you for shout out to the NACD team. I think it's so richly deserved. I mean, just an unbelievably well-written report. I really like something as simple as, strengthen oversight, deepen, I forget the words, deepen insight, develop foresight, something along those lines. And in each of those, there are easy takeaways, right? On the strengthened governance and so on, one of the things that I took away, and this is central to making it an important strategic conversation, as opposed to a reactive conversation that I feel it is in many boards, is this issue of director competence. In other words, the competence of all of us. We all know that even 10 years ago, and even as someone who's steeped in the sciences and the mathematics and so on, there is no way on God's good earth that I could keep up with what was going on 10 years ago, let alone the explosion that's happening every week now. So what do we do about that as a structure? And I do think there are many boards around us that have grappled with this. I love looking at the life science boards. I love looking at some of the consumer tech boards, because you would think that, oh, they're not really science companies. But to my mind, there's no such thing as a non-science company anymore. You've got to embrace science across the board. So this issue of director competence as a precursor and enabler of making it a true strategic conversation is one that I would love to highlight. If I may just point to one other thing that has made a big impression on me, both in the course of the commission deliberations and writing, but also as a serving board member, this idea of keeping track of what you, of course, what you know, what you know that you don't know, and maybe even what you don't know that you don't know, which is getting scarier and scarier as most of these technologies, I think Laurie was alluding to this, come together in a complementary way to really affect change in some ways. We think about robotics, miniaturization, new materials, 3D printing, AI, life sciences, all coming together in ways to affect, I don't know, the way a candy company develops wrappers for its candy with the viscosity of the material. Something as prosaic as that. So this idea of scanning and developing a scanning function that is fast enough, but dare I say it, not too fast because you have to absorb it also, so those are the two enablers I would say, Diane, just keeping track of what's out there, easy to say, very hard to do, and then really being honest and serious about, in my view, the serious deficit of technical competence on the boards. And if I may say one last thing, and then I'll be quiet. It's a mistake, I think, to equate somebody's, I'm not going to comment on people's ages, I'm in my 50s, but if you think about the degree that I got 35, 40 years ago, that's not a good measure of technical competence. So this idea of sort of going back to directors' antecedents and saying, are they a lawyer, are they an engineer? I find very misleading. It has no correlation with technical competence on the board. I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
All right, great. I want to come back to this technical competence thing, but before we do that, Tarun, I love what you said about that one of the main messages of the report is that boards are playing defense instead of offense, or at least they're tempted to. Can you give us examples, or any of the three of you, give us an example of what playing offense would look like in the boardroom, or at least on the part of the board?
I wanted to jump in on one of Tarun's points that I thought was so important. That scanning function. So one of the best ways that I get an idea of how the company is keeping up is asking that question. Whose responsibility is it? Who in the company is trying out all these new tools? I mean, as Tarun says, I can't keep up. I try to play with every tool I hear about that comes up and find time in my day to start playing with it to understand what people are talking about and why. But it would take my entire day and I still couldn't keep up. And so the question is, are other board members even understanding? Has anyone had hands-on experience? And are you enabling that? But then think about the employee base. And so that scanning question, who is out there looking at all the exciting new tools that are coming out every day? $100 billion was invested in just AI last year. And in Q1 of this year, it was already $80 billion. So think about my industry, venture capital. Think about all those new companies that are being funded, all those new tools that are coming out. And so who in the company is scanning to figure out in each function what tools could be accelerating them to not just keep up with the competition, but perhaps leapfrog in some area? You're not going to be able to leapfrog in every area. So one of the key things is picking the spaces you're going to play in. Is it going to be marketing content? Is it going to be supply chain optimization? Is it going to be something in legal and compliance? What's it going to be? Every company is going to choose those differently, but if you're not out scanning, as Tarun said, the pace, and Ryan said, the pace right now is really hard for any one person to keep up with. And so how are you dealing with that scanning function? And I like that he talks about it that way. I used to call it the sponge or the sensor function, but whatever you want to call it, That's a really good question to ask the executive team, the CEO, and the board. One techie, as Sharun said, I happen to have studied computer science way back when in the dark ages, but I'm not coding every day. I'm trying to play with as many tools as possible, but having one board member who's a techie is not going to work. So
Yeah,
I think those points are right, right there. I have
that's
to keep
great.
up. I have to play with something every day and read something every day or watch a TED Talk or read a report. There's so many opportunities to be out there, but it behooves every board member to take it on as their responsibility.
Yeah, I love that question. I think it's a great offense question. Like, who's on top of this? I'm doing everything I can, but who's, yeah.
But, this, sorry, Ryan, I don't want to cut you off, but this can be institutionalized, right? It's not, I mean, I think for all of us, let me speak for myself, for me, going from something that's easy to say on this event, um, to translating to action sometimes is very difficult, right? But in this case, we have companies that have actually institutionalized the scanning function. So there are ways that we can go around and learn from them. And, I'm sure NACD can play a role in this in the months and weeks ahead. Anyway, sorry, Ryan, I
No,
thought you
I'm just going to reinforce exactly what Lori and Trinh said. So I'll give two examples. At Nortec, we have a Science and Technology Committee. We've had it for several years. In fact, the charter of that committee is in the Blue Ribbon Commission report. So lots of gratitude to the Nortec board and management team for letting us share that. In the charter, we have this sensing function written into it. And on a quarterly basis, we are talking about the offense, right? And a couple of frames that could be helpful for people. It's on the one hand, what are the technological developments? We want to follow that. On the other hand, how are the organization's customers changing their designs, their expectations over the forthcoming cycles so that Nortec in this case can get out ahead of those innovation cycles and be able to provide the right kinds of guidance. They've developed an IP portfolio, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some very powerful results that can come from explicit and regular attention from the board to exactly the kinds of things that Lori and Tarun just described. I'll give one more very quick example of the AI group that I work with, Limbic AI. Those of us who are in the field have heard concepts like synthetic data, like agentic AI, those kinds of things. This group was able to look at those trends and apply what's really cutting edge kinds of capabilities, right, at scale in that sector. In the context of synthetic AI, they used it to basically go cross-border in a matter of just a couple of weeks, which is spectacular, right? Not hiring localization experts and the rest, but really using the technology, again, back to that point of speed, of being able to just leapfrog by leaps and bounds how fast things used to go. Similar kind of event for agentic. And so with the right kind of attention to these trends, the rather immediate kinds of feedback and ROI is actually spectacular, right? And that's the last thing I would say, just to illustrate the point. In many cases, this does not need to be a technological conversation as much as a financial performance conversation. And that's one way to get the entire board and management team, really thinking about it in the same way.
Yeah, great. As Karen is saying in the chat here, we got really good at scanning the environment for competitive trends, and more recently for really having very structured ways of understanding customers. And this is, the next arena here. I want to stick with this whole thing about, I thought, Lori, what you said about you can't just have one really smart technology person on the board, that you've got to have broad, not just deeper expertise, but broader expertise. So how does that happen? In this report, it says, it quotes an NACD survey that says the following: only 38% of respondents were very or extremely confident with their peers' understanding of how tech impacted the company's growth strategy, and only 44% were super confident in management's understanding. And there are even some recommendations that board members get feedback on their technology proficiency. Like, what do you think? Would you really do that? And what's your philosophy about board education in this area where we have experts that are going to mastered classes and just trying to keep up every day?
I'll be happy to start. Um, it's going to vary dramatically in different industries, right? If a technology company board, you often have many, many engineers on the board, and they're, immersed in it. I'm immersed in it because of my day job. It sounds like Tarun is too, especially in the life sciences space. So every board member brings different expertise. I studied accounting and finance in college at one point, but I have not worked recently in a financial function, but I still feel that I have to understand finance because we have to look at the financials and understand what's in the proxy statement and understand what's in the quarterly reports. So I think boards need to look at technology much like they look at the finance function and financial understanding. And so if someone were to not understand finance and not do anything about it on the board, they're probably going to be sent to a class or, something to ensure that they understand how to provide oversight on the finance function. And I think if board members are not viewing technology as important as that, there's a real problem. Now, how you call each other out, that's challenging, especially if the senior executive team are not particularly technology proficient. And if your chair and your lead director aren't, you don't want to be calling people out. So for me, it's always go the positive. Ensure that training is more than a 20-minute education session for the audit committee on what is AI. That's not going to allow you to leapfrog. And this goes into the broader strategy discussion and purpose of the board. And I think that's where this report got. Tarun talked about it's not just about oversight anymore. It's about insight and foresight. And board members, because we are not in the company full time, we are seeing all kinds of things outside of the company. We are the sensors and sponges and scanners out there. And so we should be scanning what's going on, and we should constantly be discussing and asking questions about strategy and bringing insights that help feed into the strategy. So it's much broader. I think finance and audit are, as someone said at our conference yesterday, are majority backward looking. Hey, what did the financials look like? How did the audit go, right? You're looking at what's happened in the past and ensuring that you're identifying new risks in the present and maybe in the future. But strategy and technology are very future oriented. And so it is a complete reshaping of your understanding of your role as a board member. And management is getting educated right alongside. So, for one of my boards, we brought in this technology expert to tell the board all the things that the company should be doing, but we didn't team that with the executives from the company who were working in that space. And so it was very disjointed, and they felt like, hey, A, we'd like to get that education too, and B, we'd like to tell you what we're actually doing. And so marrying those two is also more important than ever to ensure that there is a view into what the company's doing. This is not just an IT in the basement job anymore. It involves the company's data, which could be the real assets in the future, especially if you're in a digital industry like financial services or insurance or even life sciences. One could argue it's biological data and chemical data. So the discussion needs to be so much more about the overall business strategy that involves technology, which is basically innovation in your area of research. But it cannot be backward, and every board member needs to be told that constant education is what's required, and they can get it any way they like because different board members are going to have different skill levels in various areas.
Any examples of what you see really working in terms of board education, and particularly in terms of process? Like, is that the way to do it? What you just said, Lori? You just say to the board, you guys all need to step it up?
That
How do you
obviously
hold people
doesn't.
accountable? I mean, what do you?
That's a
Tarun's
piece.
going like this.
That's a piece of it, but you've also got to. I send lots of materials. I am one who attends lots of things, and so I send video links, I send emails, I send reports. I am constantly sending information, and the wonderful thing is, the CEO generally responds and he actually says, quote, "Please keep the cards and letters coming." So I know that it is appreciated and that people are reading it.
Yeah.
Could I make a couple of suggestions? So I completely agree with Laurie's and her orientation, which is mine, which is sort of incessantly being immersed in the. But that's because I'm a nerd and I like it, so it's not a tax to me to do it. But I have two examples that come to mind, Diane, if I may. One is a French company used to be called Dassault Systems. It's the one that makes
Yeah.
the aircraft engines. I think it's called DS or 3DS or something now. Um, I just remember the CTO there just doing an unbelievable job of creating immersion experiences for the board, right? Picking a technology and really getting the board members to immerse in it. I forget whether it was part of the regular board meeting cadence in outside of Paris, or it was an extra or an optional thing. But I just remember that the board members all said it was just unbelievably effective. So that's one that jumps to mind as a supplement, not that everybody has to do everything. And then one of our NACD colleagues, Nick, whose last name I'm forgetting, mentioned that Active, which is, I think, somehow connected to the old Delphi Automotive Components company, does regular, in addition to people coming and briefing the board, as Laurie was alluding to, does regular sort of site visits to the R&D labs and things of that nature. And that's, of course, costly in terms of time, perhaps even in resources sometimes. But it has the offsetting benefit that people in the science function, technology function, really feel energized that someone is paying attention to us. So I would present those not as compliments to what Laurie was saying, but but of course the cadence, I think, as we all know, in any board that meets repeatedly over years and years, the cadence is the most how often and how frequently you consider these things.
That's great. I was going to ask you this towards the end, but since we're on the topic, let me just ask you, and especially since Dayton was kind of asking this question, if you had to share with us one thing that you read or listen to or watch regularly, what would they be? Like one or two? I mean, I know we're all over the place. I'm kind of nerdy also, so I'm always finding videos and sending them to people. Who knows if they listen, or if they watch them. But anything that you really are attached to?
I can tell you, I mean, from my perspective, I don't find a single source to be comprehensive enough. And so what I've done is just basically curated a channel, right? So through a single interface, call it Apple News or other, and follow whatever the topics are. And I think that's the best way to get as much coming in, and you have to learn how to filter through it and what's relevant and what's not. There'll be some duplication, but the risk of answering this question, which is important with a single resource, is that by definition you're going to be missing something. So I think there's plenty of opportunities to sort of consolidate through a single interface.
Anybody else have one?
I'm happy. One resource that I will point out is Stanford's Human-Centered AI Institute just published a 455-page report on AI, and they do it each year. You don't have to read all 455 pages. There's an executive summary at the beginning, but I think on AI, it's a really great summary of what's happening. However, as I said at the beginning, AI is not the only technology we're talking about. And so for me, first, I like webinars. So I sit in on almost a webinar a day. Yeah, sometimes I can only do some of them, other times longer. And the firms like PwC, who's on this, who's a sponsor today, they did one on AI use cases 2 weeks ago that was fantastic because I want to keep up to speed on, okay, what are the most common use cases? What percentage of companies are doing what? So I think pick your favorite service provider, pick your favorite law firm who are all doing webinars on the regulatory. And some people are readers, some people are auditory. I try to go for a walk every day and listen to a podcast. Pick your favorite one. There's so many good ones now. And then anytime I attend a webinar like this, when someone says, oh my gosh, you have to subscribe to this Substack or this writer or whatever it is, but then I'm also going to go back to NACD. the research materials that have been produced on every part of AI have been phenomenal. So avail yourself of those as well. But the law firms and consulting firms have terrific information. The universities as well. I was just in Cambridge and attended a number of sessions. So it also depends where you live and if you like to go to things in person and be IRL in real life with other humans, or if you're more of a reader, or if you really like to watch webinars like this. I think there is so much material out and it's free. You don't need to pay for it, but at the same time, you've got to be playing with the tools.
Yeah.
So you have to do hands-on, because talking about it is wonderful, but that is not enough as a board member. You have to understand what's out there and what's coming and why people are talking about it. Why are they worried about entire industries being completely disrupted? What is the capability of the tools today? And again, you don't have to buy them. You can play with them for 10 minutes a day. Pick a tool, play with it.
Great.
I would, at the risk of being overly narrow, I would point to one source that I really like, which is the Economist's Technology Quarterly. As the name suggests, it's the Economist magazine, the British magazine. The quarterly must come out 4 times a year, I'm guessing. And it's a thickish, 20-page supplement on technologies to watch, translated for the, how would I say it, interested, intelligent, but lay reader. And I think it does a really nice job of, so I always skim that. Unlike Lori, I'm not a listen to the podcast or watch the webinar person, though I will speed through the webinar at 2x speed.
Do something else while you're listening, which is not what people are doing on this one for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also want to acknowledge, so first of all, I have tried to go as deep as I possibly can on AI. I mean, I think a year ago, I thought AI was ChatGPT. I thought I had it. And I had a friend who works for one of the big accounting firms who said, Diane, you are like so far behind, it's not funny. And so I agree, all the things about tools. I get this newsletter every day called The Neuron. I don't even know who produces it, but it is really great for very fast read and doing what Lori just talked about, which is just identifying the tools. The other thing I want to say before we move on is there are really great comments in the chat, right? Robert, on the importance of predicting, what you don't know. I think that's so interesting. Companies, Teresa, companies needing to focus on the problem that they need to solve. The notion that Robert talks about, which is, the need also to just bring in some outsiders who can, involve the board. Sean's comment about really needing to not just say like, what's going on in our industry, but also like what's changing in the world and how does that impact the industry? One of the things I read about all the time, I remember in 2017, I was on the board of Panera still at the time, and our CEO, Ron Shake, said, we're a technology company that happens to serve food. And the following week, Abby Johnson, who was the CEO of Fidelity, said, we're a technology company that happens to deal with money. And I think those are also good offense questions. So lots of other stuff, everyone, to take a look at. Michael Tully talking about getting connected to venture capital firms or PE firms to kind of be able to see around corners and see what they're actually investing in. Let me give you let's get down and dirty here. I want to give you some specific scenarios and tell me what you would do as a board member in each of these. So number one, let's say you're on a board where the CEO says to the board, you're all pushing, you're playing offense, you're asking who's looking at the tools, we're asking all of our favorite questions, and the CEO says, look, we have so much on our plates right now. Let's get concrete here. We've got tariffs, we've got regulation, we've got this, we've got this. There is no bandwidth right now to move any more aggressively on tech, and it's probably too early for a company of our size anyway. How should you respond?
I think one of the most direct ways to do it, if you can find it, is to show existing examples that are already in the marketplace in the sector that represent some competitive pressure or threat, right? And so if you can find those, and I frankly haven't, I've worked across sectors, I haven't found a sector that doesn't have something like that. So basically what you do is you create a context where it's very difficult for someone to say, this is not happening right now and we can afford to wait, because you've actually given, material example of something that's already out in the marketplace. The other thing that tends to do is to create a shared sense of urgency, right? Which is what you want in order to move the needle forward. So if you can find that kind of opportunity, and again, it's objective. You're not sort of calling anybody out. You're not, sort of looking to go into a negotiation. You're just stating a fact. This is out there. This is what it is. This is the impact. How do we think about it? And in many cases, you'll find multiple examples across the value chain of the particular organization. And so the more that you can just ground that the antithesis of that conversation in fact and in existing stuff that's out in the marketplace, it's very tricky to continue with the kind of point of view that you described, Diane.
I think
That's a great one.
case studies are the way to go, especially if they're your direct competitors in your peer set, and say, wow, we're going to sit, but wow, our three largest competitors or three closest competitors have all announced they're doing this, and look at the new products they've come out with, and look at the customer reaction or the employee reaction or whatever. You can use public data. And companies are out. That's why I love the AI use cases. I try to tune into every webinar on that, because you get companies talking about what they're doing specifically, in every industry and how they went about it. Someone just put in the chat that it's all about change management. And I will say, one of my companies, the chief digital officer quoted, it's 10% technology, it's 90% change management. And so, it's about the people and the change. It's not about let's make sure we pick the right tool. It's moving the company forward and moving the people forward, because a lot of people don't like change.
That's great.
I also think to both Ryan and Laurie's point, Diane, there are often examples within the company where people are already doing it. So when someone says it's not the right time for us, if it's a mid-sized or large-sized company, a few thousand people, I guarantee you there'll be people who are already doing it in the company. So that seems like a simple way to defuse this idea that it's not for us at this time. And one other comment, I think it is also important, we're all, myself included, talking about technology as this ubiquitous, all-encompassing thing. But realistically, we particularly on, Ryan mentioned tech committees, and I imagine we'll talk about those maybe. But the tech committees and the charters, they have to be pretty clear about what we're not going to do, right? And that's just so important, because this idea of the tsunami coming at you, it's intimidating for everybody, and doesn't serve the purpose of, apropos the previous comment, of change management. So if we can be clearer or experiment your way to a point of view of what we do and what we don't do, that would, I think, really help people a lot. Right?
That's great. I will tell you what doesn't work, just in line with this. What doesn't work is, I think company size also matters when you're talking about competition. So if you're on the board of a $50 billion bank, it's completely useless to say, let me show you what Jamie Dimon is doing at JP Morgan. Like, you should be like him, because JP Morgan is, I have to do the math, but more than 100 times the size of that bank. So even examples that are outside the industry, but that are similar company size, are better than same industry, but something that just seems absolutely unreachable. And we've got a lot more going on in the chat again. Let me give you another scenario. Your chief human resources officer does a board presentation and estimates that 20% of your company's jobs will be eliminated as a result of AI. What's your reaction?
I'm strangling them. So I live in Palo Alto, so Stanford's close by. So sorry for all the references, but there is a professor who came from MIT to Stanford named Eric Brynjolfsson, and he started a firm called Work Helix. and he takes every job and breaks it down into its tasks. And so, for example, radiologists he found do 27 tasks in a day. Only one of them can be replaced right now by AI. So he suggests we stop talking about technology replacing jobs and start focusing on what tasks can be automated. And they're probably the tasks that people hate doing anyway. And so coming in and saying, hey, we're going to replace all these jobs is just wrong. I think jobs will change as they have with automation, and some tasks will be automated, but we are not automating jobs, we're automating tasks. And I'm seeing that my venture capital firm invests heavily in robotics and AI. And my entire career, it's been the Terminator view of robotics stealing everyone's job. I'm sorry, but I don't know how many robots are cruising around your office in place of people in my company. We don't have robots who've replaced jobs. So let's be really clear what tasks we are automating versus what jobs we are replacing.
I try to break it down into categories, right? And there are certain tasks, exactly as Lori described, that are going to be automated. A lot of that's going to be in sort of the administrative things that everybody does on a daily basis. There's some theory that it's about 30% of every knowledge worker or manager's day. We know we can automate about 80, 90% of that relatively quickly with some off-the-shelf tools. And so why not take advantage of that? But that's only one category of task. There's two more things that I think are also very important for the cultural statement that leadership wants to make about engagement with the workforce on things like AI. The other two levels are augment and accelerate. Augment is where you have these expert co-pilots, right? NVIDIA's got Chip Nemo that the chip designers use to sort of co-design these world-leading, entirely new capable chips. There's lots of organizations that are building those kinds of things out. So an expert subject matter, sort of crown jewel data-based capability. And then on the accelerate function, the big question, what are the new things that we want people to be doing, right? Because even if you save someone 10 hours a week, that doesn't mean that they're not continuing to work, a lot of hours or put in a lot of time. It's just that they're shifting the work to hopefully the higher value activities. And there will also be entirely new categories of jobs and responsibilities that come out as a result of these tools. That's been it's been consistent every single time that there's been these technology evolutions, and there's no reason to think it's not going to change. I mean, a lot of the jobs that people are doing across sectors just didn't exist a year or two ago. So there's always more to be done.
Let me give you one last scenario. Let's say you're on a board that does have technology on the agenda for the full board meeting, but it's mostly just like a report from the CIO or CTO. And the last time you were in a board meeting, the CIO does that report and the CEO even left the room to make a call while the tech report was happening. So the impression that you're getting is technology is that man or woman CTO. That's their job. But the rest of the leadership team, they got to worry about the business. Just wondering, what would you do?
I'd try to leave the board.
You try to leave the board?
I try to resign.
No. That's an academic. That's an academic response.
It's a practical question. I had time. It's a practical response. Sorry. No, but in all seriousness, I mean, then you got to create a ruckus. I mean, I'm not going to name the company, but the last large public board I was on, I insisted on a tech committee, a statute, not a statute. I don't think you can call it a statute, but a standing committee that was on the same level as audit, nominations, comp, etc. And it took 3 to 4 years to convince the board members that this was required. And but it was irritating to have to keep saying this is important. But I guess the serious version, Diane, of my answer to your question is you try something like that, and if there's no receptivity, then it's not a good use of time. So that's what I would do.
And in the report, it highlights that only somewhere between 7 and 10% of boards have a tech committee. So there's still a long way to go. And I have seen that behavior a lot. And the poor CIO often it has been told that cybersecurity is paramount, and there may be
Yeah.
a separate CISO, but the CIO is still supposed to make sure that all the systems are working. And then they're trying to update all of the operational systems. So how much time does that poor CIO have to train the entire company, train the board, be the censor? Maybe that's part of their mandate, but it's probably not. And so the big question is, how is the company structured to embrace technology in all of the business units? Because this is a strategic business imperative. It is not the CIO's imperative. And so as we started with, this has to be viewed as a strategic imperative. This is not something that is added to the plate of the poor CIO who's trying to maintain all the systems and improve security.
I would write new incentives into the CEO's performance plan for the next year that have some kind of link to exactly what Lori just said. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about what you think about tech committees. Some people have in the chat have said innovation committee. The one that I lead is called the Innovation and Technology Committee. You know, the report says, let me find it here. I've earmarked it. Current agendas are too crowded, and current boardroom agendas are too crowded and focused on backward-looking discussions with little time for forward-looking conversations about technology, and therefore, let's have another committee. Right? What's your view? Tarun kind of gave us his take on this, your thumbs up on that. What do you think about technology committees, and where have you seen them be really effective?
I'll start with this one. So I've had the opportunity to start and participate in one of these for several years, and from my personal experience, it's been phenomenal in terms of really creating what it allows an organization to do. And you can do this with or without a committee, depending on the culture of the board. But as we've talked about, an explicit, regular attention to technological change, the sensing, how markets are changing, new competition, all of the things that we covered in the BRC. So whether or not you need a particular committee to do that I think is a question for every single board. But in many cases, we've seen it to be highly effective because it carves out space. It's very easy for a board to get caught up in the details of the previous quarter and all of the sort of nuts and bolts of governance, which are super important, of course. And then, what gets sacrificed is the forward-looking kinds of things. And so this is a hedge against that. What I'd say is we've also, the NACD has published a number of articles on science and technology innovation committees in addition to the BRC. There's actually been a 20% jump in the Fortune 500, at least, of this number of committees between 2022 and 2023, I think it was. So in certain sectors of the economy, there is, I think, more attention coming to the impact that these committees can have. But in particular, if an organization is struggling to have these kinds of conversations, this is a very easy structural thing that can be done to make sure that there's, again, regular attention to it.
Let's assume you have a committee. How do you make decisions? What kinds of conversations should happen at the full board level versus at the committee level?
So one thing that I found very effective across maybe three large boards is at the beginning of the board member in charge of the tech committee and one of the technologists in the C-suite in management will go around and interview all the board members individually and say, what's on your mind? What would you like to see covered in the tech committee? What would you like to see less of? And I think both the symbolism and the substance of that is phenomenally important, right? The substance is important because it tells you there are things that neither the CTO person nor the board member in question, in this case it was me, had thought of, but something that gets on the radar. And the second, people buy into the agenda. And then when you roll it out, so in our case, we had in every board meeting, a discussion on the tech agenda. It tended to be a day board meeting or a day and a half. And we always started by saying, this is what you asked us to brief you on. And that I found works very well.
Excellent. Yeah. By the way, we have amazing comments in the chat. We don't have a lot of questions. So if you have questions, throw them in the chat. I have a million more. So I want to, while we're waiting for other questions, let me do a quick lightning round. with all of you. If your company is not on top of AI, is it too late at this point?
Not at all. I mean, it's just in the infancy of this. So, and anyway, you can't afford to be too late. You've got to get in on it. So,
Yep, everybody agree with that?
100%.
Absolutely. And again, depending on what industry you're in, it may, it may be absolutely mandatory to be scaling right now, but if you've run some experiments and you're not sure how to measure results and you don't have the right team in place, move slowly instead of rolling something out that you're really embarrassed for or that gets you into regulatory trouble in the future. But I think right now, get moving. It's fine. We're still in early innings, but again, somebody should be out there experimenting and at least testing out use cases in a safe way internally. But
Yeah.
if you're in the technology industry or the banking industry or the insurance industry, then I'm more worried because those are primarily digital companies. So if you're in a digital industry and you're not doing anything, it's very concerning. If you're in a more traditional industry that moves more slowly in technology, you still need to get moving, but it's probably not catastrophic. But, what are your peers doing?
Yeah.
And don't forget, AI is really impacting security, cybersecurity. The risks are greater. And so no matter what industry you're in, AI really can accelerate cybersecurity attacks. So that's more on the risk side, but somebody better understand what has happened on that side of the house.
Yep.
And your people
Another
are using
question.
it
What's
already.
a good first question to ask if you're joining a board and you want to understand how seriously they take technology?
I would ask, what are the how is technology-driven growth written into the incentives and the performance goals of the organization? Because that hits investment, it hits radar, it hits strategy, it hits market cap sorts of things, and it's really asking a question: have you married technology developments with strategy and growth?
Good question. Anybody else?
say how often in the board agenda the last 6 months is technology featured seriously?
Good one. Finish this sentence. If I could redesign every board agenda, I'd make more room for blank.
I would say strategic discussions, even more than technology
General.
discussions. On one of my boards, it was wonderful. We had this agenda that was basically baked in till the end of time with certain things that we addressed every quarter, right? We had our schedule, and there was no room for any free-flowing strategic discussions ever. We got through all of the backward-looking stuff and death by PowerPoint, but no strategic discussions. And we got a new lead director who came in and said, okay, that was great for the past. It doesn't work anymore. We have existential risks on all fronts, and we need to start focusing on important strategic imperatives. And as you can imagine, the CEO and general counsel were incredibly resistant at first, and then soon learned that the board actually had a lot of things to add to that strategic discussion. But, there is the natural tension between the management team and the board, of the management team saying, what do these bozos know? We're in this day in and day out. They can't really impact our strategy. What do they know? We know what's going on in the business. We know all the risks that we have. We know what makes sense in our company and what doesn't. These guys are outsiders, right? There is that natural tendency, and I've seen it in boards of small companies and large companies where CEOs very strongly feel that way. And until you start having a discussion and until board members are educated and able to bring in outside information that proves valuable to the team, they may continue to feel that way. So it's critical to leave room to tap into the director's expertise and ideas. And it behooves the chair or lead director to ensure that they have a very strong voice on how that agenda is crafted and to ensure that there's a lot of space for strategic discussions.
Yeah. Let me add a couple more questions that are in
Can
the
I-
chat. Oh, you want to add something, Tarun?
Yeah, I want to add something. I'd make more room for an informal dinner
Hmm.
at every board meeting. Because
Hmm. Would
all
you
the
do it
stuff,
before or after the board meeting? We always fight over this.
yeah, we fight about this too. I prefer before, because that's where the stuff comes out.
Hmm.
So, it's that simple for me.
Diane, could I
Yeah.
add a very quick comment to this? And it's an extension of what Lori was saying. I like the following question. What is the new value we can create based on new technologies, right?
Mhm.
And the emphasis on new allows us to not only have the strategic conversation, but make sure that the strategic conversation is not anchored in how we've always done things.
Great. I love that question. I love that question.
And I will add in the line of the dinner, I also think the board mentor program where you match a board member with the executive within the company and then rotate them every few years, because it's those dinners and those one-on-one conversations that allow the board members to understand, how the organization works and gives a lot of insights and gives the opportunity for mentoring as well, where appropriate. So I really that was a recommendation that was given to me early on in my board career, and I think it works very, very well.
Yeah, great. Let me hit on some of the questions that are in the chat. We've got some great stuff here. So, uh, one question here, just going back to board member capability from Susan, is not every board member will be a tech expert, but all should be tech literate. What do you think are the requisite elements of tech literacy for board members? And I know there's a little bit about this in the report.
I think it's about understanding the applications of technology in the context of the particular company. So you don't need to know how the algorithms are doing what they're doing, but as Lori said many times, what are the use cases, right? What are the trends that we need to be paying attention to? What are the business model impacts? What are the risks? All of that is eminently digestible and understandable and comprehensible to directors. It's a relatively light load to continue to sort of process that and follow it. What are the regulatory and ethical and responsible, sorts of trends that we need to look at as well. So understanding the applications and the impacts, but not necessarily needing to understand the deep tech and engineering.
Yeah. What have you really, here's another one related to that from Jeremy. Have you found that some directors are just really resistant to the adoption of technology or maybe even to learning about it? And if so, how is that best handled? And I know what you're going to say, Tarun,
Yes, yes.
right?
Yes. I wouldn't say no. A board, as we all know, boards are, constellations of capabilities. I'm the first person to grimace if someone says, "Can you join the audit committee?" Right? Or can you, dare I say, chair the audit committee, which I am technically competent to, but I would just hate to do it.
Yeah.
So, like me, other people have different, I think if there's a couple of people who resist it, I would try to, buy their allegiance over time.
Yeah.
But if there's more than that, then I think it's a problem for the board.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you something from the Minnesota chapter. So, and we always talk about this, right? It's so much easier to just build a new company. But if you're a legacy company in a large industry, it's really hard to do all of this. So I think this question is about your crystal ball. Are companies that are built on AI going to replace the ones that are not?
I think that's a point of view that is historically accurate, but really requires an active challenge. And that's exactly the point of the BRC, right? Do we want to just allow the organizations that we work with to cede themselves to this kind of, threat, or do we want to do something about it? There's a difference between the organizations that, for example, are creating these utterly spectacular new models and algorithmic capabilities and platforms and things, and the organizations that have customers, data, brand, great talent, great knowledge in the organization, right? And as we all know, data is the atomic unit of getting this right, and so there's room to sort of be accessing and activating those kinds of crown jewels and taking advantage, in relatively short order, I would suggest, to carve out a leadership position based on the new capabilities. So I don't think it's black and white.
Yeah.
And I think the wonderful thing is right now the M&A market is valued at a better place often for new startups that have those digital native capabilities to be embraced by larger companies who may not. And so saying, oh, it's game over, you know, we're not a bunch of AI natives is short-sighted. Get that sensor function out there, find some clever teams, you know, one or two, and bring them in. You know, even legacy industries should be looking at who are the small, nimble disruptors, because they may not get enough funding to go the distance. You're in the catbird seat if you're in a large public company, and you can go engage with those startups, but don't kill them, and determine, can you integrate a small, nimble team, or will you kill them and do you need to keep them on the outside and just partner with them? But M&A is part of that strategic discussion as well. And if you don't have the team internally, you're going to need to educate them, or you're going to need to bring in other teams. And whether you do it via hiring, or you need to move so quickly that you probably need to do a number of M&As to get them in-house, whatever it is, have that strategic discussion.
Yeah. Good. Mario's got a question, you know, where he's hearkening back to the dot-com era and lack of accountability and everything. And I realized we didn't talk a lot about metrics. You know, what metrics or indicators, if any, should boards be tracking when it comes to tech strategy?
Yeah, I like Ryan's earlier comment, which is, you know, if you can try to put some boundary conditions on how much new stuff should come out of, you have to define new, and you have to define new stuff and new technologies. But in principle, it's doable. But I like that as a metric, and then working it into the KPIs, just like we work in other things like potentially safety, or general regard for ethics, and any number of other things that are qualitative. So this is something that can be a mixture of quantitative and qualitative.
I think that there's cost efficiency always. There's pretty spectacular opportunities for individual and team productivity improvements with some of the tools that are out there. One area that gets let me just say one other thing. Obviously, all the cyber and NIST frameworks and all those kinds of things, you have to be paying very close attention to that. One area that gets overlooked as often as not is new logos, new products, new margin levels based on these new capabilities. And so I think you have to have a portfolio.
And one more I would add is the accuracy of the information. When you first start out, the accuracy might be pretty low because you haven't gone through the data transformation required. And so that's another one. But yeah, I agree with cost, time, new sources of revenues, as was said in the chat, but also accuracy.
Excellent. That's great. I want to give you each time, I always like to end these by just saying to you, for the people who are listening today, I'd love to just go to all three of you and say, you know, we've still got some questions we haven't answered. So I'm gonna get a little more specific here, but I'd love to hear from you 2 or 3 takeaways from the report that our audience of directors should take back to their companies. And extra credit, because of some of the things that we haven't talked about that are in the chat, extra credit if you can help us. Here's what we didn't cover. Is there a difference between a tech company that has a tech product versus, for instance, an insurance company that is might not have a tech product, but that has a very big back end? You know, where are the risks? And also, do you have tips on how to have really raw, unstructured conversations about all of this in the boardroom? So extra credit for any of those, but give our attendees here just some takeaways.
I'm happy to start. I'll pick 4 that were my favorite.
Great.
The first is that the biggest technology risk is not taking one. And a lot of the AI discussions that I sit in on, 90% is covering risks and 10% is covering opportunity. You got to turn that on its ear. Do not let, as this is a quote from Nora Denzel, do not let the risk industrial complex overwhelm your board discussions. I love that. Number 2 is fixate on the technology trend lines that are relevant to your business rather than the shiny objects. This gets back to the ROI. You know, Gen AI is really exciting, but there may be emerging technologies that are even more important to your business. So you don't need to fixate on any one. Third, directors don't need a PhD in computer science or data science, but they need to invest in their own understanding and stay constantly curious and open to learning new things, however they want to do it. And fourth, make sure that you are doing joint discovery with the management team rather than, hey, we know more than you, I think has been brought up, but the management team should feel comfortable to work with the board to assess new technologies. And, you know, back to the board agenda, I think one of the issues is often management teams like to come in and say, hey, we got this nailed, here's what we're doing. Rather than, hey, let's explore this together. We're not sure what we're doing. Let's have an open discussion, which was what you just talked about. There's got to be something on the agenda that is joint exploration and discovery rather than management teams feeling like they need to come into the board with fait accompli.
Great, Liz. Thank you, Lori.
Okay, should
I would say that
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
directors have an opportunity to hold space for these more exploratory topics, in particular in an environment of quarterly pressures and things like that, right? And so if the board is insisting on exploration on new incentives and things like that, then the management team obviously is sort of covered in terms of why they are spending time and resource on that. At the same time, there's an opportunity to and a requirement, a fiduciary requirement to sort of de-risk that exploration, which means crawl, then walk, then run. And in particular, if you've got a board where maybe there's some reticence in terms of the participation, you know, earn the right to scale it up based on developing the muscle and delivering some proof points that the organization can actually do things in a different way, right? So there's a lot of benefit to getting started, but you don't have to be running at 100 miles an hour, you know, from day one. It's about, again, carving out that time and then accelerating as things get more and more understandable.
Great. Love those.
I would say one, echoing the earlier conversation, play offense as much as defense, which was, I think, also Lori's first point. In a blatant bid to claim extra credit, I will say there's no such thing as a tech company as far as this discussion goes. There are plenty of tech companies that are wedded to a particular approach and blindsided by new technologies. So simply being, a large successful software company, in my view, as much predisposes you to threats as it sets you up for success. And the example I gave earlier, candy companies use plenty of material science and understanding of viscosity and material science and so on. So there's no such thing. Tech is not the same as digital. I'm never tired of saying this. One of the things that we haven't spoken about is, I think there was an earlier question in the chat that talked about what's some other technology that we should all be paying attention to. I would say genome sequencing, to put something out from nowhere, because it's transforming all our understanding of life science into data. And that brings us straight back into the data realm that we've talked about all the time. It's affecting everything, including making the shirt, making the screen on my phone, making this pen, everything will be touched by it. So those are my takeaways.
Those are great. Those are great. I got a bunch of things swirling in my head. And before I send this over to you, Ellen, to close us off, there's got to be a way. I'll take responsibility for figuring out how we continue this conversation. I mean, I would love to be part of like a Slack channel or something where all of us, including everybody on this, can share a podcast we love or ask a question or, do all this on a continuous basis, because we obviously have a lot of people who are attending this who have definitely drunk the Kool-Aid and who have a lot of expertise. So I will do that. And in the meantime, Lori, Ryan, Tarun, thank you so much for the insight and the reality check and to NACD for such a great report. Clearly, one takeaway is that technology isn't something that we are going to get to later. It is a right now issue. we used to say we don't need to know how to build the rocket, but we better know where it's going and what it costs and whether it's about to blow up. So we all need to ask sharper questions and keep innovation on the agenda, and make tech fluency part of board excellence. So thanks to all of you for being part of the conversation today. And Ellen, I'm going to flip it over to you.
All right. Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ellen Richstone, Chair of the Programming Committee of NACD New England and a public company director. All I can say is thank you, Diane, Tarun, Ryan, Lori. This was one of the most amazing programs that I know we've been involved with in the last 10 years. It was just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. The interaction, the inputs from the chat room, everything was just amazing. So thank you. And thank you to our fellows, Chapter Minnesota and Colorado, for joining us for today's program. I will have a few quick announcements before I let you go on your way. You'll see a list of upcoming programs hosted by both the New England and Minnesota chapters. Hopefully you will join us for one or more of these. Please visit our websites or scan the QR codes for a complete list of upcoming events. In particular, I'd like to highlight New England's day-long program on June 10th in person. It's called the Advanced Topics for Experienced Public Company Directors. We're highlighting it because we have directors coming from across the United States. It's a peer group session, small group, and it's designed exclusively for directors who are currently sitting on public company boards. And I hope that some of you, our fellow directors outside of New England, will join us in New England as they do every year. We do keep it small. Please note these upcoming National Leading Mind programs. Mark your calendars for these in-person programs in the following regions. As a reminder, we are one NACD. All members of NACD can attend programs hosted by any NACD chapter. While you have your primary chapter, in this case, it might be Minnesota, New England, or Colorado, who's also joined us today, you can still sign up for other chapter newsletters and attend all chapter events. Finally, don't forget the survey. The link is in the chat. There's a QR code on your screen, and it will be in our follow-up email, which you all will receive later today. Please take a moment to fill it out. We really do value your input, and we use your comments to shape our future programs. Back to the future. Thank you to everyone for attending. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Have a really wonderful day.
And Colorado members, please stay behind for our